In Luke 6:12, Jesus goes up the mountain to pray, as he often did. If he needs to withdraw from the hubbub and listen to his Father, commune. This is the heartbeat of his ministry. And it's a shared partnership, the Father and the Son. I'm doing what the Father says to do. And sometimes because we can't hear his voice, we tend to think it's a bit muted and a bit in the background. But no, for Jesus, it's front and centre. And out of this night of prayer, looking across the number of disciples that have begun to follow him, he chooses out 12 of them. Now, we know their names. Most of them we don't know much about. But what was in Jesus' mind here after this night of prayer? Well, if you throw your mind back, he's a son of Israel, and he knows in the story of Israel that God had told Jacob, your 12 sons are going to be sort of the foundation pillars of the nation. Now, they were hardly stars either. In fact, they had a pretty ordinary performance. Their history is not real bright. But nevertheless, God committed himself to these 12 men as sort of the window or the framework through which he was going to deliver a nation and a message and a person. So Jesus stays with the program, only he sort of takes it and revitalises it by choosing another 12 men who are going to carry the new kingdom forward in the new stage. Now, there's a practical edge to this. I mean, Jesus is man, he's got big crowds sweeping around him, everybody wanting to touch him, everybody demanding, can you heal my father, my son, my daughter? Well, he needs sort of crowd control, if you like. And so we know there was a team began to develop. Women began to sort of look after the finances, not the finances so much, but bringing their needs, meeting their needs for accommodation or food or clothing. And then Judas was organised as the treasurer, and Philip and Andrew in particular was an introducer. So they began to develop different roles as you do in a team. And so Jesus had this group of men who were able to carry the bits and pieces, get things done. He'd send them out to do various things. So there was logic in the team, of practicality about it. But there was more at stake than just people management here. And that becomes very apparent through Jesus' ministry because, as Robert Coleman has said in his little book on Jesus' plan for evangelism, men were Jesus' method. You know, people were his method. He invested in individuals. He didn't just see a crowd. He didn't just see a team. They weren't just going to be troops. They weren't just staff. But they were going to be a band of brothers that he was investing in daily. And he wanted them to walk with him. Mark says he chose them so they would be with him. Like apprentices, they were going to learn the trade by watching what Jesus did. And that's the way it becomes apparent as the story of the church rolls on. It's the things they saw Jesus do and the things they heard him say and watched him handle all sorts of situations, enemies, friends, demands, questions. They're learning all the time, watching apprentices, watching the master at work. Paul later describes these 12 men as the foundation blocks of the new kingdom, the apostles, the sent ones. Now, they weren't particularly remarkable. The remarkable thing about them is that they weren't remarkable. In fact, we only know stuff about Peter and John and James a little bit. The others sort of fade fairly quickly from the scene. As the church grows, they spread, and as far as we know, they spread around the world, but we don't get a lot of information about them. But we know them from the pages of the Gospels. And that's the lovely thing about the Gospels. They're very candid about the shortcomings of the disciples. They argued, they were slow to learn, they were stubborn, they were scheming, they were doubting, self-centered. The best of them were flawed, and all of them failed. In the final analysis, when the crunch came, they all failed. But the amazing thing about Jesus is that he, having selected these men, and John wrote this in his gospel, having loved us, you're hearing that, loved us, he loved us to the end. And he could see when he looked at his close friend Peter, he called him the rock, and yet he seemed so, untrustworthy in so many ways. He'd sort of get things confused and he'd get angry and all that sort of thing. and failed Jesus comprehensively at the finish. But Jesus called him the rock because he could see what he could be. And I think that's a great window into the way God's kingdom works. Jesus is taking ordinary people all over the world, just like us, and he sees what we don't see. He can look into our lives and see, I can see potential. I see something good here. I'm going to work with this. And so that's why he chose them. Having named those 12 disciples, he gathered them to him and he turned them into not just friends but brothers and family. In verses 17 to 19, Jesus changes gear, having chosen his team, and there's a vast crowd around him making demands of every kind, and I guess the disciples were getting into swing on how to control things. But it must have been an amazing scene. Just try to picture it, try to put yourself in the picture there of swarming groups of people from all over the country, outside the country, with their demands, with their needs, with their hopes and dreams, that this amazing person who'd stepped into the limelight after John the Baptist had stirred things up. For the first time in 1,000 years, they had prophets speaking like Elijah, like Moses. And it must have been electrifying for a group of people, particularly because they'd been scattered, they'd been subjugated, they'd been oppressed. And here they are waiting for the Messiah. And now in the middle of this whirling mass comes this electrifying figure. But in the middle of all this, Jesus has these 12 men around him and perhaps a wider circle around them again. And so he draws them aside, as he often did. He takes them aside and he teaches them in particular. He's focused not just on the crowd, but on that group of men and women as he's teaching them as he goes. And here we call it the Beatitudes, which is sort of probably a bit of a barrier in some words, because we've sort of bracketed it into this nice statement. We sort of put it on the wall, and we like the Lord's Prayer or the Ten Commandments, that sort of thing. But it's actually Jesus' blueprint for what the new kingdom is meant to look like, a blueprint or what do you call them, a CAD diagram these days, showing the workings of the kingdom. And it's brilliant what Jesus does, because like the poets of Israel, he teaches it in a memorable form, 4 sort of negatives, 4 positives, if you like. And it's easily memorable. They're not writing these things down so much, they're memorizing them. And Jesus wants them to learn these principles, not only just by head, but by heart. He wants to build these things into them. And so this beautifully crafted piece of writing that we love, and it's well known around the world, and people have sort of idealised it, but don't idealise it too much, because it was never meant to just be a nice sort of wall hanging. It was meant to be a powerful working document. And you need to picture Jesus looking them in the eye sternly, if you like, and lovingly and urgently and passionately as he's telling them these things. It's not just a sort of a nice sing-song voice, but blessed are, or how blissful, or how really happy, deeply happy are the people who do these things. So in the middle of this swirling mass of people, he's taking this small group of men and teaching them. Well, verse 20, grinding poverty has never been a sort of a winsome platform to start a kingdom from. Not something people aspire to. But Jesus somehow makes it a centerpiece. And why would he do that? What did he have in mind? I mean, he taught his disciples to give to the poor, and they did that regularly. He bluntly told a millionaire to go away and give all his money away and become a true disciple. He talked about how delusory and temporary wealth is. He encouraged his disciples to lay up treasure in heaven, not here on earth. He said that's all going to rust and blow away. And he told a story about a man who was a fool for putting all his eggs in one basket, saying, I'm going to build big barns and sheds, and I'm going to have a big farm. He said, what if your soul's required of you? All that is gone. So he taught them today to pray for, remember, give us this day our daily bread, enough for one day. So he's trying to teach them a daily dependence, an open-heartedness, both to the Father, that he would supply, and then to be a means of supplying to others. He liked extravagance of parties. Remember, he made, was it 900 extra bottles of wine at the wedding, and he nearly sank Peter's boat with fish. So it wasn't that he didn't like abundance or extravagance. He fed 5,000 people and there was plenty left over. But he had a sense that get the rhythm right. Don't be driven by food and wealth. Let those things become your servants. Don't become their servants. As Albert Schweitzer's famous saying, if you own something you can't give up, you don't own it, it owns you. So, yeah, here's the heart of the kingdom. Not poverty for poverty's sake, but learning to really handle material things and money and things like that, wealth, skillfully, and to, sure, give to the poor, lift people up, build enterprises that are going to bless other people. All those things are really important. Radical generosity is what Jesus practiced. And he knew too, the prophets and the wisdom books of the Old Testament were scathing about people who ripped off the poor. And God's promise to Israel was, your land is going to flow with milk and honey. It's overflowing with it. So the idea was, see the picture that seems to emerge is each man having his own farm under his own vine, but living simply, but generously and kindly and gratefully. These are things that frame Jesus' thinking. Now Matthew took this in a slightly different direction. He reported Jesus saying happiness or real bliss or deep satisfaction came from being poor in spirit. And he defined this as not being acquisitive, but simply trusting the Father for your daily needs. And so it's not capitalist greed, and it's not hoarding, or neither is it communist centralised ownership and sort of forced labour. Jesus himself modelled hard work, but with simplicity and generosity. And I think that humble recognition that God could provide just what you need, hold your material possessions lightly, remembering they come from God. We're meant to be stewards of his resources, not sort of grasping owners of them. And real happiness developed from having a heart like God's own. He pointed out that a widow he saw dropping a single coin in the offering box was closer to the heart of the Father than the selfish Pharisee who sort of gave ostentatiously, put his check there so everybody saw how much he was giving, which wasn't really that much at all because he was wealthy. This widow lady gave pretty much everything she had. The widow was giving freely out of her minimal resources, and she was more like the Heavenly Father than the wealthy man who gave grudgingly out of his abundance.